Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is John Marshall, Chief Operating Officer of Deep Roots Harvest. Thank you very much for joining me today, John.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me on.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You could also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. John, I always like to start with a little bit of background. How was it that you came to cannabis?
So I'll not make too long of a story here. So I was working with the U.S. Forest Service fighting forest fires, and in the winter I was working as a ski patrolman and avalanche forecaster. And I, funny enough, had a degree in finance and business management, and had a buddy from that world that I kept in touch with. And so when I was home in between seasons, I'd always go visit him, and he was in Colorado, and got involved in cannabis early on as an owner operator and real estate guy. And every time I went back and visited him, he was like, I got another grow going, and I got another store going. And coming from the government policy and process side, I kept tabs on him for years, for like 5 years, and was like, I wonder what's going on here with this business. And every time it just kind of seemed like it was scaling. And I said, you know what, I bet some of my skills would apply to that industry and to the emerging nature of that industry. And, took a leap of faith with him. I took a sabbatical from fire one summer and said, hey, let me come work with you. I have no idea what I'm going to do, but would love to learn more about the industry and the business, and take a little time off from fighting forest fires and come see how that goes. And the rest is history. That was like 12 years ago now.
How did you start fighting forest fires?
I went to the University of Montana up in Missoula, Montana, and it was a really common summer job, it was kind of the seasonal thing where it starts getting active in the, April, May, June, and then stays really busy and through August, and sometimes into September and October. And then you can go back to school, or you can go do a winter job, or go do some traveling. And, I gave it a shot one summer, and it was a fascinating job and a lot of adventure and fun. And it stuck with me, and I took it pretty far. I became a smoke jumper and got really involved with incident management and, fire planning, fire management planning. And then I got really involved with aviation resource management. So fixed wing and rotor wing aircraft and all of the compliance and manifesting and regulatory processes behind that.
That is incredible. Were you at a point where you're just like, okay, this is not a long-term play?
That was actually a big part of it. I loved being outside. Between the two jobs, I was outside over 300 days a year, mostly boots on the ground. And as I was getting a little bit older, I thought, what is this career going to look like when I'm 45, 55, 65? And I was a little bit worried about riding a desk for the government, to be honest. I thought, there's two ways this goes. I either get hurt and I have some, have to figure it out and reinvent myself, or I stay with the bureaucracy side of the government. And that wasn't super attractive to me. I said, if I'm going to ride a desk, I think being in private enterprise and getting back to my finance degree and my business administration degree would be probably time better spent if I'm going to ride a desk anyway. And so that was kind of that sabbatical, was to test the waters. And I said, you know what, this actually works great, and moved into that role.
So fighting fires and avalanches, did you see cannabis as another disaster to fight?
It's kind of, that's a good question. It's kind of turned into that, right? I mean, cannabis is super dynamic every day. People always ask me like what I love about being the chief operating officer of a big cannabis company now. And it's chaos, right? It's every day there's a regulatory change, or a new process change, or an audit, or an inspection, or, HR challenge, or, new product development. Every day is pretty different, and it's not that dissimilar from fire and ice, as we called it, because you just don't know what you're going to wake up to.
Well, what could you take from your previous career and, bring a little bit more calm to the chaos of the cannabis industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where I really found my niche is, you always have to kind of zoom out, right? Like the emergency in front of you is not necessarily like my emergency, right? And I think that's kind of how cannabis is. You have to be able to zoom out and take a step back and say, okay, well here's this challenge today. How are we going to get ahead of this? Is it a resource problem? Is it a compliance or a legal problem that we need to get figured out as a standard operating procedure problem? Is it a communication problem, right? That's a lot of it is just being sort of okay, who are all the interested parties here, which is not that dissimilar to a fire where you have your private, your private property holders, you have the bureaucracy, you have land management agencies, and how can you sort of be the voice that brings all those different constituents together and try to manage the problem?
In your role, what are the greatest challenges that you face today?
Um, I'd like to say our company's maturing. It's not quite as like, oh my God, there's a fire today as it used to be. I think the problems that I'm dealing with more are how to grow the business into the long term and really create a sustainable company that, provides longevity for our employers and our shareholders and our industry here in Nevada. And how do we just create a healthy business environment that's easy to regulate and that has primarily good operators that are playing by the rules, but that also creates a really pro-business environment that allows us to all scale and create more jobs and more tax revenue and better education funding and everything else.
Right now, is Nevada a healthy business environment for the cannabis industry?
It's a little bit feast or famine, I would say. It's definitely matured, and with maturation, I think we've seen some oversupply. I kind of give this example of what we've done in our grow. 5 years ago, we were growing 30 to 40 grams a square foot. We're now growing, anywhere from 80 to 100 grams a square foot. And then you times that by the 100 cultivators out in the state. And then you look at the demand side, and it's like, yeah, we see some new people. See new consumers entering the market. But is it a one-to-one with the amount of volume of supply that's increased? Probably not. So I think we've seen a lot of price compression. We've seen a lot of, price compression is the biggest one, right? With oversupply, I say it's like soybeans, right? If you have too many soybeans, the price of soybeans goes down. And we're very similar. When you have a ton of cannabis out there, especially aging cannabis that people are unable to move, the consumer's typically looking for value. And so you see this kind of natural price compression of things. And unfortunately, what that means for a lot of folks is that they have trouble making ends meet. And we've seen, I think, don't quote me directly on this, but something like 40 cultivators go out of business in Nevada in the last couple of years. And then you're starting to see some attrition in the production side and the even the lab testing side, right? But on the positive side, you are seeing some consolidation and companies that are healthy. They either have an exit strategy, right? And they say, we're maybe a mom and pop or a couple store operator, and we're able to exit our position or join a bigger boat, so to speak, which is what we did. Or they're able to start looking at doing their own deals and getting some capital investment going and creating a bigger platform to scale their businesses on. So I think for those of us that are doing well, business is pretty healthy. We like where the market's at right now. I think we're starting to see supply sort of come into equilibrium a little bit. And we'll be really curious to see what happens with some of the hemp stuff and the rescheduling. We think that could drive some additional demand. And then we're really curious to see what happens with gaming longer term here in Nevada. Right now, there's no cannabis really on the strip at all. And so that's this huge unaddressable market that we would like to see some movement on in the future.
What has to happen to gain that movement?
With the casinos specifically, it's still a Schedule I narcotic, right? And they have a privileged business license. And because it's a privileged business license, they're very reluctant to get anywhere close to a Schedule I narcotic. And so the casinos have just said, you know what, until there's some resolution there, we're not going to play nice with you guys. And I mean, don't get me wrong, they're great partners on a lot of fronts, but just being able to distribute and consume on strip is not an option. So we think, optimistically with rescheduling, if we do get to a Schedule 3 or even delisted, we'd see some movement there on the strip.
Okay. Part of that scaling and growing, Deep Roots bought The Source in 2024. Has it been a smooth transition?
Somebody said something to me right when we bought it, and they said, you know what? I think you'll be surprised at how long it takes for the dust to settle. It's going to take a year to 18 months for things to really start flowing. And I think that's very true after experiencing it. The very like-minded cultures. We worked a lot with The Source prior to us doing a deal with them. I knew their chief operating officer is a good friend of mine. We knew a lot of their team. We did a lot of purchasing and wholesale reciprocal relationships. And we thought, you know what, this program's just going to bolt right onto our program and it's going to be awesome. And the reality is there's a lot of the devil's in the details, right? And there's a lot of just little nuance, whether it's a compliance thing or an HR thing or an accounting thing or a logistics thing that took a while to get everybody kind of rowing the same direction on. Even things like procurement. We had X amount of brands, they have X amount of brands. Those brands weren't always the same. We make Deep Roots products, whereas the Source people super supportive of Deep Roots products, and all of those little stumbling blocks took a long time to get over. Now we're like 18 months in, and I think I can confidently say like we're working really well as a team, and both teams are essentially one and the same. We still have the separate storefronts and some separate marketing and even in-store ethos, but from behind the scenes, it's running really well.
Well, that's one of the things I noted. I saw a post that you put up on LinkedIn where you said, "Do no harm, stay flexible, and keep an open mind." Do you think you stayed true to that throughout the process?
I think so. Do no harm was the big one, right? Because they were a pretty healthy business. We acquired them mostly not because they were poorly run or because they weren't doing anything wrong. It was more like a financial ownership challenge that got them to where they were and brought them to us. And so we really said, what can we learn from them and what can they learn from us, right? And they were doing some things really well in the Vegas Valley. We were pretty new entrants into the Vegas Valley. We have a couple of rural stores that are our bread and butter, and when we opened our city stores, we said, let's just do what we were doing with the rural stores. And it didn't really work. And so when we acquired The Source, we really took a deep dive into what they were doing from a promotions and consumer engagement and consumer communication and in-store, customer hand-holding and how they're displaying and merchandising their products, how they're pricing their products, all those different things, right? And we learned a ton from The Source with that stuff because they'd been in the Vegas Valley for 9, 10 years, and I think they'd really built a customer basis that we hadn't figured out yet. And then on the converse, right, we were really good at logistics, we were really good at purchasing. We had these two busy border stores that were pretty challenging to buy for and get product to, and we had all those things figured out. We had a very strong accounting system and HR program. We have really strong administration on that front. And so we were able to bring some structure to that side of things for them.
What were some of the surprises that you had in the city? That kind of worked in the rural side, but didn't work in the city.
I think it was, I hate to say this, but we almost just kind of opened you hung our opening shingle on the building in those rurals, and there wasn't a lot of competition. And we sort of just took those customers for granted. Like they didn't have a lot of options. They're sort of, driving by the store and they said, oh, let's go check that store out. And when we got into the valley, I mean, we call it the knife fight, right? Everybody's trying to go after the same customer. Like I said earlier, there's not a lot of new customers. If people have been in cannabis, now cannabis has been around for 10 years in Nevada, and if they've wanted to tiptoe into it, they probably have. And they're either like a regular consumer or they're an every once in a while consumer. We're not finding a lot of brand new entrants to the market, and we're all kind of going after those same customers. So we learned a lot there from The Source. We brought their marketing team over, and they knew how to speak to those folks, and it's been huge.
What are some of the marketing tactics and promotions that have helped you win that knife fight?
I think it's better. A lot of it's made on the buy, right? Using our now with our purchasing power, having more stores, we're able to go to vendors like, great partners like Stizzy and Nature's Chemistry and Green Life Production, all these little vendors and some of them big vendors. And we're able to say, hey, you guys, we're going to be buying for 11 stores. We're going to be one of our top products on our shelf in all of these stores. What can you do to help us get better traction, whether that's doing more product giveaways or promos or, helping us with marketing and billboards or in-store, merchandising or, event activation, pop-ups, all those kinds of things. So we rely really heavily on our vendor support. And, that's one example, right?
Yeah. Any big plans for 420 this year?
Yeah, and I'm probably not the best guy to ask. We've got a ton of stuff going on in every store, from pop-ups and live music to tons of promos all week. We were actually just talking a couple days ago. They started on Wednesday and they're going to be rolling through the holiday. So, giving away a ton of value and a lot of great products, and have had some really good partnerships with our vendors to support this weekend.
Is that still the biggest shopping holiday, or have others surpassed it?
That Green Week's pretty big now. The Thanksgiving week, that's a
Yeah.
that's a really heavy week for us too. The New Year's pretty good. We're a little bit, business like globally in our business because we have some seasonality at our border stores. We have some different kind of peaks and valleys with those guys when all the snowbirds come back to Mesquite, as an example. When they come back in the fall, once temperatures start dropping off, we see a big lift financially from that store. But yeah, in the Vegas Valley and some of the more competitive stores, 420 and Green Week are the big ones.
What do you do to attract vacationers or visitors, the tourist dollar in the area?
We're not actually a huge tourist operation. We really focus. Most of our stores are kind of in the community and off. You can't be on the strip anyway, but even further off the strip, we're down in Henderson. We're over closer to Summerlin. We're in North Las Vegas, and we've always thought, typically the cannabis consumer, the bulk of the cannabis consumers that are buying regularly are pretty avid. They're pretty passionate about their product. They're pretty avid consumers. They're brand loyalists. And so how do we get those folks back into the store a couple times a month? Have everything they need, the good, better, best quality selections, a lot of price, differentiation between all the different products, and how do we get them to come back in more? So we don't do a lot of tourist deals. It's just, as you can imagine, competing against somebody like Planet 13 that, their bread and butter is with tourists. It's just for us to get them off of the strip and driving into the neighborhoods is a little bit tougher. So we focus on the locals.
I understand that. You had mentioned the impact that regulatory change could have on the business. Do you have any faith that that would happen anytime soon?
It's a regulatory change it's a big umbrella, right? There's so much local regulation, there's state regulation, there's national regulation. It's constantly changing. It's like I call it the river of rules, right? It's like it's so wide and so deep and so fast, and you just try to take each little piece as it comes. We don't see an expand like a license expansion event in Nevada. We think that the state is pretty content with the amount of licensees that are already in here. We see some regulatory relief in the future. We have a legislative session coming up next spring that we're all really excited for. We have a couple of new initiatives that we're I don't know if any of these will go anywhere, but we'd love to see, a little bit more of a robust home delivery system. We'd love to see some reduction in packaging compliance, things like exit bags that are a little clumsy still. Still can't do things like sell bottled water and Snickers bars in our stores, which, those kind of seem to go hand in glove with a cannabis shopping trip, right? You might as well be able to get some other snacks and other things. Some, this is an interesting one. We have a store license that we've been trying to find a home for in the city of Las Vegas, and there are so many things that prevent us from finding a location. Whether it's too close to a community center, it's too close to a school, or it's too close to a gaming establishment, or too close to another existing dispensary. How can we make it a little bit easier to find a home for some of these licenses too, right?
Do you get involved on the regulatory side at all?
Yeah, very much so. I'm actually the president of the Nevada Cannabis Association, the NCA, which is the largest regulatory um, lobbying group in the organization, in the industry, and here in Nevada. And so we're really involved, not so much locally with that organization. That's more of a state organization. We represent retailers, cultivators, producers, and distributors. And so we're going out and surveying all those constituents and understanding what's important to them, and then trying to have some wins there and at the legislative session every couple of years, and then just try to communicate best practices and everything else to the rest of the industry.
Is that where some of those initiatives like home delivery came from?
Totally, yeah. Not exclusively, right? But we try to come to the table when we're talking to the state with one voice, right? Instead of you going to the state and me going to the state and Joe going to the state, how can we all kind of come with a list of things that are doable, whether it's 5 things or 20 things, and how do we prioritize what everybody thinks are the most valuable to our organization? And if we go with a conscious voice or with a concerted voice, I think we end up having a better success in the long run, right?
How does the NCA's impact kind of stand up compared to other state organizations throughout the U.S.?
I was like tangentially involved with the Colorado one, which was the marijuana industry group, and I think it's really similar to that. We listen really closely to things like the normal organizations, some of those national organizations. And we try to understand like what's going on with the big national picture too. Like the hemp ban is a perfect example, right? Like what's going on nationally with intoxicating hemp, and then how should Nevada sort of craft some of our local and state regulations in alignment with the national, right? And hemp's the hot button topic right now, the intoxicating hemp stuff. There was just a local ordinance passed in Clark County, which is our main governing body down here in Vegas, and they're enacting a hemp ordinance that's very in alignment with the federal one. And the NCA got a little bit involved there. We went and testified at the local county hearing, and then we're taking those, the outcome of that bill and saying, well, can we get something like that going with North Las Vegas or with the city of Henderson or even with the state, right?
In your opinion, what's best case scenario when it comes to hemp regulation?
It's a tricky one, right? I think that what we're the most frustrated with right now as a marijuana guy or a cannabis guy is that they're playing by a totally different set of rules, right? There's no separation from the church and schools and community centers that we talked about earlier. They can get banking, they can, there's no metric inventory manifest program. There's nobody. The testing regulations are very loose, right? And so what we would like to see, like if there's going to be an intoxicating hemp world, it needs to at least parallel our world, right? You need to have the same boundaries and hoops to jump through. Otherwise, it's just this completely uneven playing field. And I think the whole idea of a regulated cannabis space is to provide safe and a controlled substance in a safe manner that's tested, that's providing for customer, safety. And if you have this whole other like side of the fence here that's operating like totally, willy-nilly, I just think it creates a little bit of a challenge. So, whether it rolls into cannabis, whether it's, regulated in its own world, I think that's all up for debate here over time. I think an outright like prohibition of hemp derivatives is, we saw how well that worked with cannabis long term, right? It's not very tenable. So I think at some point it's going to have to be regulated. It's just how and when and who and how much is it going to cost and everything else, right?
Is it reasonable to expect some more regulations that come from the marijuana side to come into the hemp side of the business, and loosening of some of the other restrictions on the marijuana side, kind of paralleling what's been successful in hemp? Do you think we can kind of like meet in the middle for a best case scenario?
I think so. And I actually heard of something, I can't remember where I saw it online, but it was called the one plant solution, right? At the end of the day, this is all, a form of cannabis, right? And how do we like put it under this umbrella, regulatory schema. I think, but then it also is like a single state operator, at least me personally, we want our little kingdom to, exist as it is. And as soon as you start throwing a bunch of curveballs at that with interstate commerce and, if our little grows have to compete with these huge California grows, that's going to be problematic for some of our, employees and owners and everything else too, right? So it's a really complicated, world we're in when it comes to cannabis, and I think it will be for the foreseeable future. And I think hemp just like makes it even more confusing.
Well, I mean, with all these complications facing your business, how do you keep the pulse low?
Yeah, this is back to the fighting fires, right?
I suppose. Yeah. You're just like, yeah, I've seen worse. Yeah.
Yeah, your emergency is not my emergency. No, I always joke around. It's like, we take our business super seriously, but at the end of the day, it's about having a good time and being passionate about the plant and being passionate about the products we're making and our customer service, right? We love our customers. How do we give them the best experience and the best product so that they can go enjoy this great product with their friends, whether it's hiking or hanging out in the yard or watching a movie. And how do you take all this like complication and chaos and stress and bring it back down to its core, which is, this stuff makes people happy, right? And it's a great product that I think we're super supportive of. And yeah, you got to deal with all these like the outside noise, but the signal versus the noise, right? The signal is that it's a healthy business, it's a cool product, it's a great community, and we're excited to be participating in it. And take everything else with a grain of salt, and fight the fire where you can. Just like fighting fires, it might be burning over the town over here, but how do you take the eastern flank over here and keep it just to the other side of the river, right? And so we focus on the things that we can control.
Is the long-term plan to remain a single state operator?
Well, so I say that as me personally, but we are part of Vireo Growth now. We merged into Vireo Growth earlier this year. We're still operating under this home of local operators, or the HOLO we call it, where we're operating very independently. We've started to synergize some things like accounting and some HR functions, some insurance, obviously, right? Like it's going to be better to buy insurance as a big entity than a little one. But yeah, we're doing our own thing here in Nevada and trying to continue to grow in Nevada and figure out where we can scale a little bit more here.
Is it seeing that transition from the other side now, where you're kind of taking over the source, where now you're kind of folding into Vireo?
Totally. And I was just talking to our CEO and our CFO of Vireo recently, and they kind of have the same philosophy, right? Do no harm. Like we bought this great company, Deep Roots Harvest, because of who they are, because they're running a good business, and because they have, some really talented cultivation and production and logistics and retail teams. And we don't want to come in there and say, oh, you got to do it the Vireo way, right? Like they bought us because we're successful. And it's been a really great, healthy relationship because we're able to kind of do our thing, lean on them for some, whether it's capital or leadership or, purchasing power or whatever it is with insurance. It's been a really nice fit so far, and we hope to continue that things will just kind of percolate up.
It seems like it's important to the company to be a good steward of the community. So what does Deep Roots do to be a good corporate citizen?
Yeah, we do quite a bit of philanthropic, stuff, whether it's donations and charitable givebacks. We do a big canned food drives at all of our stores every fall. We do a lot of street cleanups in our rurals. We take over, a section of highway and go clean it up. I just saw a posting for one the other day. Really involved locally with other little businesses and activations and music events, and just try to be really good partners in the community.
Before you had these careers, that sort of delivered a day-to-day thrill. So what do you do for your thrill seeking, in your personal time?
Yeah, I'm still pretty active personally, getting out and about. I'm a big dirt biker. I actually have a big 7-day dirt bike ride coming up at the end of the month. We're riding through all of like super rural southern Utah and Arizona out to the Grand Canyon and camping off the dirt bikes and doing that with five buddies, and went helicopter skiing this winter at a place I used to guide for with some friends. So I still get out there and have some adventures.
Yeah, I'd say that's an adventure. That's incredible. So 7 days, just how many miles are you going to cover?
I think we're looking at about 1,100 miles, 7 nights or
That's
6 nights,
incredible.
7 days. Yeah.
Okay. Has there
Yeah.
been is there like your white whale out there, something that you want to do that you haven't been able to do yet, like mountaineering or anything?
I'm not much of a mountaineer. I don't, believe it or not, even though I smoke jumped and parachuted, quite a bit, I'm really don't like heights. So I've never been a rock climber or an alpine guy. Even on my dirt bike, I try to keep my tires on the dirt and just trail ride. But um, I would love to do like an around the world or like ride the dirt bike to South America, to the tip of South America, and experience that culture. There's something about a dirt bike where the air and the smells, and you're so much closer to talking to people than in a vehicle or doing the tour bus thing. And I think that'd be super fun someday.
No, it's the changes of seasons in Wisconsin right now, so the bikes are starting to come out.
Yeah.
Uh, one thing I like to ask about is just because, given we're a B2B type podcast and we're looking to serve other cannabis industry professionals, is there any tech or technology that you use in your day to day that helps you do your job better?
Man, we have such a tech stack these days. We that's another thing we're like constantly joking about is like, what's the next software we're getting, you know, onboarding. But we use I'm a huge analytics guy. It probably carries over from fire and ski patrol, where you're looking at the weather every day and trying to figure out if it's going to snow or rain or get hot. And um, similar deal with cannabis. We're constantly looking at the analytics of whether it's sales or yields or how many units did we produce last month of a cartridge or whatever. And so we use a software called Click, which is we basically dump. It's kind of a, I guess, the visualization engine of a data lake. So we're dumping all of these different data sets into this data lake and then basically making sense of it, right? And creating some really nice analytics from it. And some of those analytics are like in graph form, and then some of them are in like the pretty picture trend lines. And man, that's just been I was joking around like it's like driving with windshield wipers on for the first time because you have all these crazy complex parts of the business that you just don't have that much visibility into. And now I feel like with some of the new software and some of the new analytics guys that we're working with, we have so much more information to base decisions off of. AI, obviously, a huge one. We're starting similar to that data lake. We're now plugging AI into that data lake so we can, literally ask questions like, hey, what was my best performing store last Friday? And what was the best SKU that sold on a Friday night? And, how did my promotion perform? And who was my bud tender or my host that day that performed the best? And, it's just wild, right? How quickly this is all changing and how much information's becoming more and more easily accessible.
Talking about bud tenders and staff in general, is there anything that works for your company that helps with employee turnover, retention, and HR?
It's really it's job specific, right? If I feel like in some of our, more entry level, more manual jobs, we experience higher turnover, right? At the middle management and supervisory staff and director level, we see very little turnover. One thing I like to say for my directors, I've had very little turnover at the director level, and I work for my team more than they work for me. I'm here to provide resources and leadership, and whether those resources are money, whether it's another facility, whether it's a new piece of equipment, whether it's more staff. Like I'm here to let our leadership really run their own business and have their own vision for what their business is going to become. And then I'm just here to support them in that vision, right? And as is our other, whether it's our chief financial officer or our chief administrative officer, we're just trying to make them successful. And it's I think it's a great way to just build this like culture of, I'm not doing what John just tells me to do, right? It's I have this vision, my team has this vision. I want to, here's a good example is our lab. They said, you know what, we really want to make solventless. Like we've been a BHO lab for 10 years. We're really good at BHO. We've been making BHO forever. We've made every product under the sun with BHO. And the guy said, you know what would be really cool is if we made this boutique high-end premium solventless line, whether it's a dab or a cartridge or a disposable, And we said, boy, what do you guys need? Oh, you need a whatever 200 grand for the equipment, and we need to remodel the part of the building, and we need the marketing team to come up with the new labels and the branding. And so that was my job, right? Is like make them successful and bring their dream to life. And now we've had that solventless lab open for about a month, and our products are just hitting market, and everybody's super excited about it.
Well, I mean, that kind of support, top-down support, is very refreshing to hear because, that's just not the case for everybody out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great. And we do that across the board, right? It's cultivation. It's like, I don't want to tell you we need more sativas or more hybrids or, get rid of the CBD strain you're growing. Like you guys tell me, right? Like get with retail, get with marketing, talk about the new genetics you want, figure out how to, get them into the grow and let's see what performs. You guys decide what grows well and what doesn't. And, we do that across the board, whether it's logistics or HR. And I think that gives, and then hopefully that is translating down through the ranks too, right? Then hopefully the director of production is then saying, hey, what do you guys want to do in the kitchen? Do we need to, you don't like that whatever flavor? Like, let's make a new flavor. Go ahead and R&D that new flavor that you want to try, right? And it just trickles down, and hopefully we get a lot of just team buy-in, right? And team collaboration, and people feel like they're being heard and that they have some input on the direction of the company.
With all the products that you guys have developed, is there any in particular that's your favorite?
I'm kind of a pre-roll disposable person. We did a major brand reconsolidation or consolidation, I guess, when we acquired the source. We ended up having about 12 brands after we acquired the source. They had their brands, we had our brands, and it was just this like maze of product. And we consolidated it down to 3 brands called Neon Moon, High Heads, and Camp. And it's kind of the good, better, best philosophy. Camp is our premium. Neon Moon is all of our live resin and mid-tier products. And then High Heads is our value and distillate kind of stuff. And I really, I got to say, I like the Camp products because they're our premium products, but I really like our live resin. I was a BHO guy, like back in the early days. It was one of the first projects I worked on was in the lab and getting to understand the lab and getting to understand butane and solvents and how it all works. And I think our live resin products, our cartridges and disposables in particular, are some of the best out there. And I'm really proud of what our team makes down there. And I'm super excited to see the new solventless stuff that these guys come up with.
No, that sounds incredible. Like I'd be excited to try that too next time I'm in town. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we get out of here, and I really do appreciate you being generous with your time, John, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself or your work at Deep Roots Harvest?
That we're not like a bunch of corporate suits, right? There's still a lot of people in this industry that are really passionate about the industry. And I think people are sometimes even surprised when I walk into the store. They're like, "Oh, John's the COO." I thought it was like some guy in wherever in Maryland that was wearing a suit. And I think being really relatable. I think we're a really relatable company. We're pretty transparent. We're very your word is your bond kind of company. Still, we do a lot of handshake deals with our vendors, and I think they'd all think that we're very hopefully easy to work with and do what we say we're going to do. And that's what I like to think that of who we are as a company, right?
Is there anything other than the solventless line, anything else that people could expect to see from Deep Roots in the near future?
Genetics are always changing. We've got some super new, exciting. I don't have them in front of me, but some really exciting new genetics in the library that will be hitting market here pretty soon. We had a packaging adjustment. Speaking of regulatory changes, right? We had a packaging adjustment at the last legislative session that's allowing us to make bigger form factors. Before we were limited to 750 milligrams per cartridge. Now that's like 2,500. So we're able to do 2-gram cartridges and 2-gram dabs. So we're getting excited to bring a couple of those products to market. We had an infused pre-roll called the Firebird that, we probably got a little too cute with it. And we sent it back to the drawing board to sort of reimagine it and try to simplify it and make it a little bit more cost effective. And that product should be hitting the market here pretty soon. So yeah, kind of constantly the new product innovation and new product development is, something we're always proud of.
What got too cute about it?
I think it just got expensive, honestly. We were trying to use, diamonds and premium flower and, hand rolls, and it got too expensive, quite frankly. Like, maybe not cute is the right word, but maybe too fancy.
Yeah.
It just ended up being too expensive. And then when we finally got it to retail, they were like, "Well, we can't sell this. It's too expensive. The demand is down here, and you guys are up here." And it just ended up not really penciling to make that. So we went back to the drawing board with it.
How much was it?
Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head. It
Yeah.
was, I mean, I think that when I think about the margin on it, I think the margin on it was like 20% or something for an internally produced product. That's crazy, right? If I can go get presidentials or Claibornes or Stizzy infused pre-rolls for, and make a 45 to 50% margin on to make our own internal product at a 20% margin just doesn't pencil.
Understood. Well, John, thank you again for taking the time, man. And I really hope we get a chance to do it again soon.
Yeah, great questions, David. Thank you.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For John Marshall, Chief Operating Officer of Deep Roots Harvest, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we will see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.